All right, welcome back. Talk of the Town this morning. Good to have you with us for the ride to work today. And we got a very interesting guest coming up next. The North Carolina Supreme Court has 7 members, and they are elected in staggered years for 8-year terms?
8-year terms.
8-year terms. And we've got one of the justices, one of the Supreme Court justices, one of the Supremes here in the studio with us this morning. We've got Justice Bob Edmunds, who is on the North Carolina Supreme Court. Judge, good to see you. Good morning. How are you?
Oh, I'm tickled to death to be here. Thanks so much for putting me on.
Good to have you in Eastern North Carolina. I know you're doing a run across Eastern North Carolina, getting to know folks. And, you know, a lot of people don't even understand the process of how you become a Supreme Court judge, because they get it mixed up with what we hear at the federal level, because, you know, the president appoints the Supreme Court there. But that's not how it happens in North Carolina. Give us the process.
No, unlike the federal people, we are not appointed, except, well, it can happen because the governor, when there is an opening, can make an appointment, but whoever is appointed has to run in the next election. Most of us are just outright elected. So it's an electoral process, just pretty much like our state senators and our state representatives go through, except the pace is different. We're elected at 8-year intervals. They're statewide races. They change sometimes, where at the moment they are nonpartisan. In the past they have been partisan, and there is a bill before the General Assembly now to make them partisan again. Whether or not that will pass, of course, is anybody's guess at this point. But we are required to get out just like other candidates and meet people and try to sell ourselves and explain what we do.
And next year, in 2016, you're on the ballot.
That's correct.
Now, are you the only person from the Supreme Court that will be on the ballot next year?
Again, that's correct. There are 8 of us, or 7 of us, excuse me, but next year I'm the only one that's up.
Yeah. Why is that? That seems odd that there'd only be one person elected in an election, especially a big election year like 2016.
Well, I think it happens because, as I said, when someone leaves other than because a term is finished, the governor appoints a replacement, and that person has to run at the next election.
I gotcha.
So if there's an appointment sort of out of step, then they can pile up. This happened last year when 4 out of 7 had to run.
Yeah, very interesting. And, you know, it's interesting, too. I'm dying to ask your opinion on this and that and all the issues that we talk about on this show all the time. But interestingly, the United States Supreme Court has just sent down a new ruling on that, and you're really not allowed to talk about issues, right?
We are pretty restricted on what we can talk about, and as many judges are sort of reluctant to get too deeply into things because our job is to be impartial.
Yeah.
And if we have staked ourselves out on a position, then the people who come before us, who are on the other side, can say, well, wait a minute, how can you possibly be an impartial judge if you've already said to everybody you favor one particular point of view?
Right.
So we're very cautious in what we do, how we behave.
And of course, you know, there are so many topics out there right now that the Supreme Court is likely to be involved in the future. You can kind of understand that, but I kind of see how that works. But it really does mean that voters need to look at these candidates for not just the Supreme Court, but for all judgeships, and learn something before you get to the ballot box about that judge's philosophies and beliefs, right?
That's true. We tend to run on our resumes. One of the nice things that the state does is there is a voter guide that comes out before every statewide election, in which the candidates are given a certain amount of space, in their own words, to present themselves to the public, and every voter should get one of those. But otherwise, judicial candidates tend to run on their resumes. In my case, I've been a judge for 2 terms. That's 16 years on the Supreme Court and some time on the Court of Appeals. So there's a body of cases I've written that, you know, if people are really interested and like reading, they can find out a lot about me and how I approach cases.
Justice Bob Edmunds from the North Carolina Supreme Court, our guest this morning. Tell us about your background. Where'd you grow up, and where'd you go to law school and all that?
I can't claim to be a North Carolina native because I was born in Danville, but I've lived in Greensboro since, I guess, about 1956 or 1957, when my parents moved there when I was very young. My mother's from North Carolina, and that's why we came home. So I've lived in Greensboro ever since. I went to college out of state, but I came back home to UNC to law school.
I heard you even played some college lacrosse.
Not well, but I played, and I enjoyed it. It's a great sport. I played a little soccer, too. But anyway, as I was getting older, growing up and starting to listen to my parents again, my dad said, listen, Dad, when it's time to if you want to go to law school, you need to go where you're going to practice. And so that was pretty much led me to my choice to go to UNC Chapel Hill, which has been great. I work with my classmates all the time, run into them.
Do you did you practice law for a good long while before you became a judge?
Different things. I started as an assistant prosecutor in Greensboro in the Guilford County District Attorney's Office. After a couple of years there, I was hired as an assistant federal prosecutor. I held that job for about 4 years, and then President Reagan appointed me to be the United States Attorney for the Middle District of North Carolina, which is pretty much that portion of the state between Salisbury and Durham. So, man, that was a great job prosecuting all those cases. After I left that job, I spent about 6 years with a firm in Greensboro in private practice, doing mostly criminal defense work, though a little bit of civil work, and ran for the Court of Appeals in 1998, was elected to that court, and then was encouraged to run for the Supreme Court in 2000, was elected and reelected in 2008. So I've held this job longer than I've ever held any other job.
Sounds like a great background as well to hold this job, and so we appreciate what you do. Again, Justice Bob Edmunds from the North Carolina Supreme Court. Educate us a little bit on how cases get to the Supreme Court. We hear all the time that the Supreme Court has ruled on this or that, and of course it has to go to a certain process before it gets there. How is it decided what case actually gets to the Supreme Court?
We have a certain degree of freedom in the cases we take. If somebody is charged with first-degree murder and gets the death penalty, it comes directly to us. There's no intermediate stop because those cases are so serious. Most trial cases, when they're reviewed, go to the Court of Appeals. If in that group, those judges sit in groups of 3. If they split 2-1 on an issue, then the parties can require us to take the case. So that's the source of a lot of our cases. And the third one, the ones that we think are most interesting, are the cases we're not obligated to take, but the parties ask us to take because they're important to the jurisprudence of the state or evolving body of law, like the law of privacy, things of that nature. So we get a lot of requests to take those cases. We call them petitions for discretionary review. It's very much like what the U.S. Supreme Court does when you hear it's granted certiorari. And those are the cases that we take because we think there's an issue that's important. They're the ones we choose to take. And in many ways, they're the most interesting cases of all.
Well, that's fascinating stuff, and it's interesting that you'll be on the ballot next year. So we'll be looking for you, and people again need to research your beliefs and your philosophies. And if you're concerned about the way a person might vote on a big issue that's coming, and we've got some in North Carolina that could be coming.
We got some that are there now.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so we appreciate all that you do, and it's nice to meet you. And thank you for making a run through Eastern North Carolina. It's good to have you down here.
Well, it's great to be here, Mr. Hinton. Thank you so much.
Don't ever call me that again, please. Call me Henry. Appreciate it, Judge. Justice Bob Edmunds of the North Carolina Supreme Court. All right, let's get a break, and we will be back with more Talk of the Town. Stay with us.